The sun had barely risen over the horizon when the bus rattled to a stop in front of the sprawling military training base. Dust rose in small clouds as the doors swung open, releasing a flood of young recruits onto the gravel. The air smelled of earth, sweat, and polished leather boots, carrying the heavy weight of anticipation. They had come from across the country, different states, different lives, but each carried the same mixture of excitement, fear, and unspoken doubts about what awaited them. The recruits spilled from the bus, some clumsy and awkward in their new uniforms, others moving with the natural confidence of athletes. Boots hit the gravel in uneven rhythm, some tripping over loose stones, others adjusting the stiff collars and tightly pressed sleeves of their dress shirts. Among them, a few had already learned to mask their nerves behind a facade of arrogance, while others swallowed their fear and tried to stand taller, as if physical posture alone could shield them from the coming weeks of punishment. Whispers drifted among the lines. "Did you hear she trained with SEALs?" One recruit muttered nervously. "Yeah, they say she doesn't tolerate idiots," another replied. Murmurs like this spread through the group like wildfire, but not all were listening. Some were too busy glancing at the horizon, wondering how the early morning sun seemed to scorch the earth even before fully rising. The compound itself was intimidating. Towering walls surrounded the grounds, lined with razor wire fencing and surveillance cameras that glinted in the sunlight. Drill instructors patrolled the area like hawks, their piercing eyes scanning the recruits with an intensity that made the bravest soldiers squirm. Barracks stood in perfect rows, each uniform, each brick, and each courtyard reflecting the regimented precision that would be drilled into the new arrivals. It was an environment built to strip away individuality, to test endurance, and to forge discipline from raw determination. As the recruits assembled into formation, a sense of collective apprehension filled the air. Some shifted nervously, heels scraping gravel, hands twisting sleeves, collars, or the straps of their packs. The young man at the front, tall and broad-shouldered, tried to project confidence, though the beads of sweat forming along his hairline betrayed him. Beside him, a smaller recruit, barely 5'6", swallowed hard, silently questioning her own ability to survive in this unforgiving world. The juxtaposition of sheer bravado and trembling uncertainty made the line feel alive, tense and electric, as if the air itself was charged with anticipation. Then a sudden silence fell. The sound of footsteps echoed across the yard, measured, authoritative, deliberate. The recruit's eyes turned as one toward the approaching figure. She was unlike anyone they expected. A female drill instructor, tall and commanding, moved with precision, each step resonating power and control. Her uniform was impeccable, her boots shining, her hair tightly bound under the regulation cap. But it wasn't just her appearance that captivated the recruits. It was the aura she carried. Authority radiated from her in waves, silent but undeniable, demanding attention without a single raised voice. Whispers erupted once more among the recruits. "She's the one who worked with Navy SEALs, right?" one asked. Another nodded, wide-eyed. "They say no one gets past her. Not men, not women. No one." A few recruits laughed nervously, masking a creeping fear, while others stared in awe. The truth was clear. She had arrived, and the unspoken rules of the yard had shifted in an instant. Her presence alone was enough to set the tone, to draw boundaries, and to silently communicate that weakness would not be tolerated. The instructors moved among the recruits, inspecting posture, uniform alignment, and the smallest signs of hesitation or defiance. Every eye was scrutinized, every movement assessed, every slip judged. The recruits had practiced standing at attention, but the reality of a live, commanding figure made previous drills seem like mere rehearsals. Some stiffened as the instructor's gaze swept over them, while others struggled to maintain composure, adjusting posture and mask-like expressions in a desperate attempt to appear competent. A young recruit, tall and muscular, leaned slightly to whisper a joke to his neighbor, testing the boundaries of decorum. The instructor's eyes snapped to him instantly. He froze mid-sentence, the joke dying on his lips. Her gaze was not merely a look. It was an invisible tether, pulling every recruit into the present, reminding them that no act of arrogance, defiance, or distraction would go unnoticed. The busyness of the yard, the shifting, whispering, muttering ceased in that instant, replaced by a taut, watchful stillness. Orders were barked sharply, but controlled, measured, yet cutting through the murmurs and nervous movements. Form ranks. The command echoed across the yard, and the recruits stiffened, forming lines that reflected both nervous eagerness and a subconscious fear of being singled out. Eyes forward. Shoulders back. Attention. Each command further reinforced the order and discipline that would define the coming weeks. For some, every word felt like a challenge, every pause a test of mental strength. As the recruits waited, the instructor conducted a silent evaluation, walking along the lines with the precision of a predator, measuring prey. Each step, each glance, each slight movement was purposeful. The recruits were acutely aware of the shifting weight of her presence, the intensity of her gaze, and the subtle yet unmistakable authority she exuded. Their chatter faded, replaced by an almost reverent silence, as if instinctively they understood this was no ordinary drill instructor. This was someone who could break them and rebuild them, shaping raw potential into formidable skill. Even the early morning sun seemed to acknowledge her authority, casting long, precise shadows across the yard. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the sense of gravel, sweat, and pine, mixing with the faint metallic tang of the bass. Each recruit felt it, the tension, the anticipation, the sense that every action from this moment forward would be scrutinized, analyzed, and judged. Fear mingled with excitement, respect with apprehension. They had arrived expecting challenge, but what they did not anticipate was the silent storm now standing before them, ready to transform them all. The young man with arrogance, standing at the front of the line, shifted uneasily under the weight of the gaze. Confidence and bravado had carried him this far, but for the first time, he questioned whether it would be enough. Across the line, the smaller recruit clenched her fists, trying to still the tremors of fear and excitement racing through her body. Each recruit was different. Each brought their own strengths, weaknesses, and doubts, but all were united in this moment, facing the same undeniable reality. The real training had begun, and there was no turning back. The instructor finally stopped at the center of the yard, the full weight of her presence felt by every recruit. She paused, scanning the lines, letting the tension settle like a tangible fog over the assembly. Then she spoke calm, measured, yet cutting straight to the core of every recruit. "Welcome," she said, her voice steady but authoritative. "From this moment forward, you will learn what it means to follow, to endure, and to respect. Some of you will fail. Some will rise. Your choices will define you, not your size, not your background, not your excuses." A shiver ran through the ranks. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight far heavier than any command previously shouted in training. Each recruit understood, on some primal level, that everything had changed. This was no longer just a physical challenge. It was a mental, emotional, and spiritual test. They were about to enter a crucible, one that would forge some into soldiers and break others entirely. And standing at the center of it all was the one who would guide, push, and challenge them in ways they could not yet imagine. As the first rays of sunlight caught the edge of her cap, glinting like steel, the recruits realized one undeniable truth. Survival would demand respect, humility, and complete attention. And whether they liked it or not, this female drill instructor was the measure of everything to come. The first chapter of their journey had just begun, and no one could predict what the day would bring. or how one moment would change everything? The moment she stepped fully into the training yard, the air seemed to shift. It wasn't a sudden gust of wind, nor the subtle rustle of uniforms. It was something more profound, something intangible yet undeniable. Every recruit, from the tallest to the smallest, felt it immediately. She moved with a confidence that did not rely on words, an authority that radiated from her posture, her steps, and even the calm intensity in her eyes. There was no room for doubt here. Every movement she made demanded recognition, respect, and awareness. Her boots struck the gravel in perfect rhythm, echoing off the surrounding barracks like the drumbeat of a command none could ignore. Some recruits instinctively straightened, their spines stiffening as though her gaze alone demanded absolute attention. Others, less composed, felt the tension in their bodies ripple, unsure whether to hold their ground or shrink in place. She had a reputation, and though many had heard stories, nothing had prepared them for the sheer presence of the instructor standing before them now. Whispers flickered through the ranks, low and hesitant. "I heard she trained with Navy SEALs," one recruit murmured, voice barely audible above the shifting gravel. Another nodded, a hand gripping the edge of a pack strap nervously. "They say no one gets past her. Not men, not women. No one." It was the kind of legend that makes grown soldiers hold their breath, a mix of awe and fear that spread like wildfire through the formation. But she neither confirmed nor denied any of it. Her eyes scanned the rows of recruits, measuring, calculating, silently noting the posture, confidence, and hesitation of each individual. There was a subtle grace to her movements, but it was not soft or delicate. It was the calm precision of someone trained to master both the body and the mind. Each step was deliberate, purposeful, each glance calculated. Her presence was magnetic yet intimidating, commanding attention without a single raised voice. The sun caught the insignia on her uniform, glinting with a sharp metallic sheen that only emphasized the authority she carried. In her presence, rashness seemed foolish, hesitation fatal, and arrogance dangerous. A tall, broad-shouldered recruit attempted a casual adjustment of his uniform, pretending not to notice the gaze that seemed to penetrate his very thoughts. Beside him, a smaller recruit clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms to suppress trembling. Every recruit was suddenly hyper-aware of themselves, of their stance, of the uneven rhythm of their breathing. In that moment, they understood instinctively that training here would not be about physical strength alone. Mental acuity, attention to detail, and immediate responsiveness would be the true measures of survival. She paused at the center of the yard, her eyes sweeping the ranks. It was not a casual glance, it was an evaluation. Her gaze measured confidence, arrogance, fear, and uncertainty all at once, assigning an unspoken score to each recruit. The effect was electric. Conversations ceased, whispers died mid-word, and even the bravest of recruits felt their pulse quicken. In one fluid motion, she raised her hand, signaling a halt to movement, and silence fell across the yard like a heavy curtain. "Listen carefully," she began, her voice calm but commanding, carrying over the gravel, the sun-baked concrete, and the tense air between the barracks. "You are not here to prove yourself to your peers. You are here to prove yourself to yourselves, and to the standards you will be held to in this yard. Strength, skill, and endurance will matter, but respect and discipline are the foundation. Without them, none of the rest will mean anything." Her words sliced through the nerves, each sentence a blade, forcing recruits to confront their own inadequacies. Her presence was more than authority. It was a living demonstration of what discipline could create. Years of physical conditioning, tactical training, and mental fortitude had forged her into someone who could dominate any environment, control any situation, and command respect without shouting or threatening. Every recruit realized instinctively that she had earned her place. not because of reputation alone, but through relentless, disciplined mastery of mind and body. A few recruits exchanged nervous glances, the weight of reality settling heavily. One young man, previously brimming with bravado, found himself swallowing hard as his mind raced. Could he match this level of control? Could anyone here? A smaller recruit, struggling to steady her breathing, realized that physical size and strength would not shield anyone from scrutiny. The instructor's presence alone had leveled the playing field, reducing all prior assumptions to irrelevance. As she began pacing along the front line, recruits were forced to stand rigidly, their eyes forward, posture flawless. The soft scrape of her boots on gravel was almost hypnotic, a metronome enforcing focus. Occasionally, she would stop in front of one recruit, pause, and allow her gaze to linger. It was never accusatory, but always exacting. A tilt of her head, a tightening of her jaw, or the briefest narrowing of her eyes communicated volumes. Subtle cues, barely perceptible to the untrained eye, carried lessons no shouted order could convey. For the recruits, the experience was almost overwhelming. Every thought seemed magnified, every hesitation amplified. The instructor did not tolerate weakness, not because she enjoyed it, but because survival demanded it. They were being prepared for a world where mistakes could cost everything, and in her presence, that reality hit with unrelenting force. Some struggled against the rising tide of fear, while others leaned into it, adrenaline sharpening their focus. Then, unexpectedly, she halted near the tall, arrogant recruit at the front of the line. He straightened, attempting to mask the nervous flutter in his chest with a confident grin, but the instructor's eyes pierced through the facade. She didn't move closer, didn't touch, didn't shout. She simply looked. And in that look, the recruit felt as though she had already assessed every thought, every intention, every ounce of pride and bravado he had carried into the yard. A shiver ran down his spine. He had met arrogance with authority, and he had lost before he had even spoken. The smaller recruit beside him clenched her jaw, biting back a gasp as she realized the sheer magnitude of control this instructor wielded. Respect here was earned instantly, not negotiated, and it was clear to everyone that underestimating her was the gravest mistake one could make. The silence she enforced was not merely obedience, it was awareness. Every movement, every glance, every heartbeat mattered, because in her presence, nothing escaped scrutiny. Finally, she stopped at the center of the yard again, raising her hand in a gesture that demanded undivided attention. "Today marks the beginning of your transformation," she said, her voice steady, measured, yet filled with undeniable authority. "Some of you will discover strengths you never knew you had. Some will confront weaknesses you've tried to ignore. And some will fail. But the choice is yours to make. Every action, every decision, every movement will determine whether you rise or fall." Her words hung in the air like a challenge and a promise, simultaneously. The recruits were spellbound, their fear mingling with excitement, curiosity, and determination. For the first time, the magnitude of what lay ahead became undeniable. The female drill instructor was no mere figurehead or token of authority. She was a force, a standard, and a challenge that none could ignore. And as the sun climbed higher, catching the polished edges of her uniform, each recruit realized that everything they had assumed about power, strength, and leadership was about to be tested. In that moment, the yard was transformed. Fear and respect interwove, tension coiled like a spring ready to snap, and every recruit understood a fundamental truth. Survival here would demand complete attention, humility, and the recognition that she was not to be underestimated. The true training had just begun, and in her presence, everyone's limits would be tested beyond anything they had ever imagined. The morning sun had climbed higher, bathing the training yard in harsh light that reflected off the gravel, metal fixtures, and perfectly aligned boots. The recruits had stood for over an hour now, feeling the weight of the female drill instructor's presence pressing down on them. Every rustle of clothing, every shuffle of feet, and every whispered breath was amplified under her gaze. The air was thick with tension, an almost physical force that reminded everyone that this was no ordinary drill. Among the recruits, one young man stood out not because of skill or composure, but because of arrogance. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and physically imposing, carrying himself as though he already commanded respect. From the moment the drill instructor had entered the yard, he had whispered jokes and sarcastic remarks to his neighbors, testing the limits of decorum. A female instructor? Should be easy? He muttered under his breath, enough for a few nearby recruits to hear. He smirked, confident that his bravado would shield him from consequence. Yet, beneath the surface of his confidence, a subtle unease had begun to creep in. For the first time, he felt the weight of scrutiny in a way that words or stories had never conveyed. The instructor's gaze wasn't just watching him. It seemed to pierce into his mind, cataloging his thoughts, judging his intentions, assessing his potential. Every attempt at a confident posture felt forced, every smirk slightly crooked. And though he tried to mask it with bravado, the smallest tremors betrayed him. The other recruits were not immune to tension either. A smaller recruit beside him shifted on her feet, trying to keep her hands still as her pulse raced. She had trained for months before arriving, pushing herself to build strength and endurance. Yet the sheer authority emanating from the instructor made her feel inadequate in ways she could not articulate. Each command, each pause, each measured step from the instructor amplified the pressure on everyone present. As the line of recruits stretched across the yard, quiet whispers began to circulate. "Did you hear she broke a seal in training?" One recruit murmured nervously. "Yeah, and they say she's untouchable," another replied. Some laughed nervously, but their laughter was hollow, tinged with fear and awe. The reputation of the drill instructor, legendary as it was, had become tangible in a way that no story could have captured. Her authority was immediate, undeniable, and electric. The arrogant recruit seemed oblivious or unwilling to acknowledge the growing tension. He leaned slightly toward a neighboring recruit, attempting another whispered joke, this time about how easy the morning would be. The words barely left his mouth before he felt the weight of the instructor's gaze shift directly to him. His pulse spiked. For a fleeting moment, the yard seemed to hold its collective breath. Even those standing farther away could sense the shift in energy. He swallowed nervously and straightened, trying to force a posture of casual confidence. But the instructor didn't move closer, didn't yell, didn't even raise a hand. She simply looked. And in that look, the young man felt exposed. Every ounce of arrogance that had carried him this far suddenly felt brittle, fragile, and insignificant. He had assumed strength and confidence could shield him, but in her presence, they were meaningless. Meanwhile, tension between the recruits began to manifest in subtle ways. Some adjusted their stances repeatedly, trying to appear composed. Others avoided eye contact, unwilling to invite scrutiny. A few whispered quick reassurances to one another, seeking solidarity in the shared discomfort. And yet, amidst the fear, there was an undercurrent of determination. Each recruit felt an almost primal challenge building inside them. To prove themselves, to endure, and to survive under conditions far more intense than any had anticipated. The instructor's presence was more than physical, it was psychological. Every movement was a lesson, every pause a test, and every glance a reminder that nothing escaped her notice. Recruits who had entered the yard with a sense of entitlement or casual confidence were now forced to confront a reality far harsher than they had imagined. Weakness, arrogance, and carelessness were no longer theoretical concerns. They were tangible threats to survival in this environment. As the morning wore on, minor incidents began to highlight the tension among the recruits. A misaligned boot, a dropped glove, or a nervous cough could draw a piercing glance, eliciting instant correction. The yard, which had seemed spacious and open, now felt like a pressure cooker, every recruit compressed by the intensity of observation. And though no one yet realized it, the first real confrontation was approaching, a spark waiting for the perfect conditions to ignite. The arrogant recruit, growing restless, shifted his weight again, muttering under his breath. "I bet she can't even handle a real challenge," he said, a smirk returning to his lips, despite the growing tension in his chest. A few nearby recruits glanced at him, eyes wide with unease. Some hoped he wouldn't push his luck, while others silently cursed his arrogance, knowing it could endanger more than just himself. Unseen by the recruits, the instructor had already noted his behavior. Her eyes followed every subtle movement, assessing posture, measuring intent, and cataloging weaknesses. She understood the psychology of overconfidence, the way arrogance could mask fear, and how dangerous that combination could be in a training environment. Her training, which included years of advanced combat, tactical operations, and mental conditioning, had prepared her for moments like this. Every recruit was a case study in potential, and every potential had to be tested, shaped, and refined. Time seemed to stretch. The sun climbed higher, the shadows of the barracks and fencing lengthening across the gravel. Each recruit felt the weight of the day pressing down on them, magnified by the unrelenting presence of the instructor. Their breaths were shallow, their senses heightened. Every rustle of clothing, every shift in stance, every glance sideways was amplified. The tension was almost tangible, coiling through the yard like an electric current. And then it happened, the first real spark. The arrogant recruit, growing impatient and frustrated with the discipline, stepped slightly out of line. His smirk widened as he whispered one final provocation, just enough for the neighboring recruits to hear. "Let's see what she's really got." The words were careless, reckless, but they were also a challenge. The yard seemed to hold its collective breath, sensing that the first real test of authority was imminent. The instructor paused, eyes narrowing slightly. She didn't move immediately. She allowed the moment to hang in the air, letting the recruits witness the natural consequences of arrogance. Every muscle in the arrogant recruit's body tensed, his confidence wavering under the weight of scrutiny. For the first time, he felt the reality of his position. The instructor's presence was not just a warning, it was a force that demanded respect, and his arrogance had placed him directly in the line of it. Around him, the other recruits watched silently. Some leaned slightly forward, curiosity mingling with fear. Others closed their eyes briefly, mentally preparing for what they sensed would be the inevitable confrontation. The energy in the yard was electric, a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and silent awe. Every recruit knew, instinctively, that they were about to witness something unforgettable. The tension continued to build, each second stretching longer than the last. The instructor's gaze was unwavering, her stance calm, yet commanding. Every recruit understood that she was aware of the arrogance before her, and that she had already decided how to respond. No one spoke. No one moved. The stage was set, the players positioned, and the first clash between overconfidence and authority was about to unfold. In that moment, the yard was a crucible. Fear, respect, anticipation, and adrenaline combined to create a charged atmosphere. The arrogant recruit's smirk faltered, replaced by the first flickers of uncertainty. The smaller recruit, watching closely, realized that this would be a lesson none would forget, a demonstration of discipline, skill, and authority that would define the tone of every day to come. And all of it would begin with the first confrontation, a test that would leave everyone forever aware of what it truly meant to face a master of control and command. The stage was set. The tension had reached its peak. And as the sun blazed overhead, casting sharp, unwavering shadows across the yard. Every recruit understood one undeniable truth. Nothing about this training would be easy. Nothing could be taken for granted, and one reckless moment could change everything. The first real test of the recruits' endurance, courage, and respect was imminent, and the instructor was ready. By mid-morning, the heat of the sun had intensified, reflecting off the gravel and steel surfaces of the training yard. The recruits had already spent hours standing at attention, absorbing the weight of the drill instructor's presence, adjusting to the constant scrutiny, and suppressing nervous energy. Every shift of stance, every nervous glance, every fidgeting hand was noticed, catalogued, and judged. Yet for one young recruit, confidence and arrogance still simmered just below the surface, fueled by naivety and misplaced bravado. He had been standing at the front of the line, towering over some of the smaller recruits, smirking with the assurance of someone who believed themselves untouchable. His whispers had tested nerves, his subtle defiance had poked at boundaries, and now, after observing the instructor's calm authority for hours, impatience had begun to take root. "Let's see what she's really got," he muttered under his breath, voice just loud enough for nearby recruits to hear. His words, filled with cocky challenge, were like a spark in a dry field of tension. The drill instructor, who had been observing the line silently, paused in her pacing, her eyes fixed on him with laser-like precision. For a moment, nothing moved except for the faint rustle of uniforms and the shifting of feet on gravel. The yard seemed to hold its collective breath. Every recruit, aware of the simmering tension, turned slightly, sensing that something was about to happen. Even the wind seemed to slow, as though the world itself had recognized the impending confrontation. Unable to resist the compulsion of testing limits, the recruit stepped slightly out of line. It was subtle at first, just enough to draw attention without immediate consequence, but it was deliberate, a challenge. He leaned forward, shoulders squared, his smirk widening, convinced that his physical advantage in height would intimidate the instructor or, at the very least, let him dominate the moment. "This'll be easy," he whispered again, more audibly this time, his voice carrying just enough for a few recruits to stiffen in alarm. Then, in a reckless act of defiance, he reached out and grabbed her arm. The motion was abrupt, impulsive, and calculated to test her reflexes, but he had underestimated every factor. The yard fell silent instantly. Gravel crunched beneath boots as every recruit froze, their eyes wide in shock. The casual arrogance that had defined the recruit for weeks dissolved in a heartbeat, replaced by immediate, visceral awareness that he had crossed a line. Some recruits gasped quietly. Others simply stared, unable to move, paralyzed by the unfolding scene. The instructor did not flinch. She did not raise her voice, did not shout, and did not react with panic. Instead, she moved with a calm, fluid precision that belied the intensity of the situation. Her weight shifted subtly, her knees bending just enough to prepare for balance and leverage. In one seamless motion, she executed a Navy SEAL-taught submission maneuver years of training, condensed into a single, efficient action. Within seconds, the recruit found himself face down on the ground, immobilized, utterly unable to move. The sound of gravel sliding under shifting weight echoed as the recruit struggled in vain. His smirk was gone, replaced by wide-eyed panic. The instructor's hold was perfect, not violent, but decisive. Every recruit in the yard had front-row seats to the display of skill, precision, and control. The air was charged, almost electric, as awe and shock rippled through the formation. The lesson was clear. Strength alone was meaningless without discipline, control, and respect. The recruit's limbs strained, muscles tightening in futile resistance, but the drill instructor's mastery of leverage and technique rendered every attempt ineffective. It was not brute force that secured her dominance. It was calculation, training, and years of conditioning. The movements were almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. A slight shift of weight, a subtle rotation of the torso, a precise angle applied to pressure points. The result was absolute control, executed with silent authority that left no room for negotiation. Around the yard, the recruits' reactions varied. Some pressed their hands to their mouths, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Others exchanged incredulous glances, silently acknowledging that they had underestimated her, as had everyone who had heard the rumors but never seen her in action. Even those with prior combat training, or who had been told stories of her legendary skill, were struck dumb. The display was not only physical, it was psychological, a profound lesson in authority and capability delivered without a word beyond the first instruction. The recruit's face, pressed against the gravel, burned with embarrassment. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by raw humiliation. He had believed himself untouchable, immune to challenge. But in a matter of seconds, he had learned the reality of underestimating a true professional. Every onlooker in the yard felt the weight of the lesson as if it were their own, absorbing the unspoken message. In this yard, respect was mandatory, and disregard for authority had immediate consequences. The drill instructor released him slowly, deliberately, allowing him to regain his bearings only once it was clear that the lesson had been internalized. She stepped back, her stance calm, her eyes sweeping the yard. Not a word of reprimand was necessary. The display had spoken volumes. Silence lingered, thick and charged, as the recruits absorbed the magnitude of what had just occurred. The air seemed heavier, charged with an unspoken understanding. Defiance, arrogance, or disrespect would not be tolerated. The moment was transformative, both for the individual recruit and the group as a whole. The arrogant soldier who had tested the limits now understood the full weight of authority, the precision of trained skill, and the cost of underestimating a master. Meanwhile, the other recruits internalized the lesson through observation, realizing that survival in this environment depended on more than just physical prowess. It depended on mental discipline, humility, and instantaneous respect. For some recruits, the incident sparked a quiet introspection. They reflected on their own attitudes, the moments of arrogance or distraction that had brought them to this point, and the realization that every action, no matter how small, had consequences. The drill instructor had not humiliated the recruit to punish him. She had corrected him, reshaped him, and set an example that would resonate far beyond this single moment. The arrogant recruit slowly rose, knees brushing gravel, chest heaving with adrenaline and embarrassment. His eyes, once full of bravado, now reflected a reluctant respect. He avoided the gaze of the drill instructor, understanding in that instant that the true lesson was far larger than the humiliation he had just experienced. Respect, discipline, and humility were not optional. They were survival. In the silence that followed, the instructor addressed the yard. "This is your environment now," she said, voice steady, carrying across the gravel and steel with effortless authority. "Every action, every thought, every decision will be observed. Discipline is not negotiable. Respect is mandatory. And arrogance will be met with consequences." Her words hung in the air like a tangible force, cementing the lesson in every mind present. The recruits absorbed her message, the impact of the demonstration settling into their consciousness. The yard, once filled with nervous energy and scattered bravado, had been transformed into a space of heightened awareness, mutual respect, and recognition of skill. The incident with the arrogant recruit had not been a mere display of dominance. It had been a masterclass in authority, control, and the realities of life under the rigorous standards of training. Even the surrounding instructors, who had watched from the sidelines, acknowledged the flawless execution. It was not simply a lesson in physical combat. It was a demonstration of mental acuity, timing, and strategic control. The young soldier, humbled and subdued, became both a cautionary tale and a symbol of the transformative power of discipline. The moment ended, but the lesson lingered. The yard remained silent for several long seconds as recruits processed what had transpired. Conversations, whispers, and small movements resumed slowly, each infused with a newfound sense of awareness. For some, the event would remain vivid in their memories for years, a defining moment that shaped their understanding of authority, skill, and the standards they were now expected to uphold. The sun climbed higher, shadows shifting across the yard as the day continued. But the impact of the encounter would linger far beyond the morning drills. The arrogant recruit had learned humility in seconds. The other recruits had witnessed true mastery, and the drill instructor had reinforced, through flawless execution, the principles that would govern every moment of training to come. The first real challenge had been met, and the message was clear. Respect, discipline, and skill were not optional. They were survival. The yard was silent, yet the silence was charged with electricity. Gravel crunched faintly under the recruits' boots as they shifted uneasily, still reeling from what had just unfolded. The arrogant recruit, once the loudest and most self-assured of the group, lay sprawled on the ground mere seconds ago, and now he was scrambling to his feet, a mix of embarrassment, anger, and awe coursing through him. His chest heaved as adrenaline faded, leaving him with the stark realization that he had been thoroughly outclassed. Every bit of bravado he had carried into the morning had evaporated under the drill instructor's precise, unrelenting control. The recruits surrounding him stared wide-eyed, processing what they had just witnessed. Their brains struggled to reconcile the rumors and stories they had heard with the reality in front of them. This was no exaggeration, no embellished tale whispered in barracks over shared meals. This was the female drill instructor, calm, composed, and supremely skilled subduing a large, confident man with the fluidity and precision of someone trained alongside the Navy SEALs. Whispers of awe began circulating quietly, tentative at first, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the spell. For a few recruits, shock translated into physical tension. Shoulders stiffened, breaths shortened, and every minor movement seemed amplified under the weight of observation. They had entered the training yard with a certain naivety, expecting physical challenges and grueling discipline, but nothing had prepared them for the sheer authority embodied in her presence. The realization hit with force. This instructor demanded respect, not because she commanded it verbally, but because she earned it through mastery, skill, and complete control. The arrogant recruit attempted to regain composure, brushing gravel from his uniform, shoulders squared, chin lifted. But the smirk he had worn moments ago was gone. It was replaced by a tension that he could not mask. Deep down, he understood that his challenge had been not only foolish, but dangerously naive. For the first time, he felt the weight of true authority, and it was far heavier than anything he had encountered in his short life. Every peer around him had witnessed his defeat, and every pair of eyes now carried the silent reminder that arrogance without skill and respect was meaningless. The smaller recruit nearby pressed her lips together to stifle a gasp. Her fingers had been clenched so tightly into fists that her knuckles were white, yet the relief and admiration she felt were impossible to conceal. She realized that strength was only one piece of the puzzle, that control, precision, and discipline were far more decisive in the moments that mattered. The instructor's demonstration had imprinted itself on her mind, a lesson that words alone could never convey. It was immediate, unforgettable, and undeniable. Around the yard, similar reactions were evident. Some recruits whispered softly to one another, incredulous and impressed. "Did you see that? She didn't even yell. And he's down." Others nodded silently, faces tight with focus, absorbing the full magnitude of what had just occurred. It was more than a physical display. It was a lesson in psychological dominance, in the consequences of underestimating authority, and in the kind of mastery that could only come from years of training, discipline, and dedication. The drill instructor released the hold completely, stepping back with measured precision. She allowed the now humbled recruit to regain his stance, but her eyes remained locked on him for several long seconds, a silent reinforcement of the lesson she had just delivered. Every motion she made was deliberate, each step intentional, reinforcing the impression that nothing in this yard was accidental. She had not needed to shout or berate him. The demonstration alone had conveyed the consequences of arrogance and disrespect. The recruit's mind raced. Thoughts of pride, ego, and entitlement were being replaced by a new awareness. Respect was not optional. It was the foundation of survival. The lesson was harsh but fair, and it would linger in memory far longer than any verbal reprimand or minor correction. Around him, peers absorbed the same truth, some silently revising their own assumptions, others noting weaknesses they could not afford to display. Every recruit understood that this was the standard now, the expectation that authority would be met with respect, skill with attention, and arrogance with consequence. For the first time, the yard felt unified in its understanding. Previously scattered thoughts, nervous energy, and quiet insecurities coalesced into collective focus. Everyone's senses were heightened, every subtle movement noticed, every reaction carefully processed. The instructor's demonstration had served not only as a lesson for the arrogant recruit, but as a masterful shaping of the group's consciousness. It was a turning point, an event that would define the atmosphere for the days, weeks, and months of training to come. Some recruits reflected on the nuances they had observed, the slight shift in weight, the precise application of leverage, the subtle control of the opponent's balance, and the unflinching calm that contrasted starkly with the recruit's flustered panic. Every detail had been a lesson in discipline, technical mastery, and the psychological components of combat. Observing her in action taught them more about leadership, authority, and self-control than any textbook ever could. The arrogant recruit now stood rigid, chest rising and falling rapidly, sweat glistening along his hairline. The gravity of the instructor's authority settled over him like a tangible weight. The humiliation and shock were deep, but so too was the seed of respect. Every instinct told him that defiance now would be foolish. Compliance, attentiveness, and humility were the only paths to regaining any measure of credibility. His peers' eyes were on him, silently recording whether he had learned the lesson, whether he would internalize it, and whether he would adjust his behavior. Meanwhile, the smaller recruit, standing nearby, exhaled slowly. The lesson had been personal as well as collective. No matter size, strength, or preconceived assumptions, skill and discipline determined outcomes. Fear mingled with admiration, creating a complex emotional response that reflected both anxiety and motivation. For many recruits, this moment crystallized the true stakes of their training. The instructor's presence alone demanded full mental engagement, constant vigilance, and total respect. The drill instructor finally addressed the group, her voice calm but resonant, carrying over the yard. This is what discipline and training achieve. Respect is not a suggestion, it is mandatory. Authority is earned, skill is demonstrated, and arrogance will always be corrected. Take this lesson to heart. Survival depends on understanding it. Her words were measured, yet they struck with the precision of her movements, reinforcing the principles she had just illustrated. The recruits absorbed every syllable. Some nodded slightly, others stood with tense stillness, but all were affected. The yard, once a space of scattered nervous energy and tentative bravado, had become a disciplined, attentive unit. The lesson had reshaped their perception, instilling awareness, focus, and respect for both skill and authority. For many, it was a profound moment that would remain etched in memory as a defining point in their military training. Even the arrogant recruit, humbled and shaken, recognized the magnitude of the experience. He understood that physical strength alone could not dominate. It required control, precision, and the ability to respect those who had mastered their craft. Around him, the yard's collective energy had shifted, a mix of reverence, determination, and the sober understanding that they were being tested in ways far beyond simple drills. Time seemed to slow as the aftermath lingered. The recruits continued to absorb the impact, quietly processing the emotions, implications, and lessons. Some looked at one another, silent acknowledgement passing between them, a shared recognition that this moment had permanently altered the dynamics of the group. The instructor, poised and unwavering, had asserted control and commanded respect without raising her voice beyond what was necessary. The effect was complete, immediate, and unforgettable. As the sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the yard, every recruit understood a fundamental truth. Arrogance would not survive here. Skill must be respected, and authority carried consequences. The incident had been more than a demonstration. It had been a psychological recalibration for the entire group. The lesson in shock and respect would guide behavior, shape attitudes, and instill discipline for every drill, exercise, and moment to come. By the time the next command was issued, the recruits were transformed. They moved with heightened awareness, each step deliberate, each response measured, and each interaction informed by the lesson they had just witnessed. Shock had given way to respect, and respect, tempered by humility, had solidified into understanding. The yard, once a space of nervous energy and tentative bravado, had become a place of disciplined focus, collective learning, and profound appreciation for the mastery displayed by their instructor. In that moment, the recruits realized something undeniable. The female drill instructor was more than a leader. She was a living embodiment of the principles they were here to learn. Skill, discipline, authority, and respect had been demonstrated in one precise, unforgettable sequence. Every trainee, from the tallest to the smallest, would carry that lesson with them, internalizing it as both a warning and a guide for what lay ahead. The day continued, but the imprint of the confrontation remained. The arrogant recruit, now subdued and contemplative, adjusted his stance carefully. The other recruits, their confidence tempered by awe, moved with greater mindfulness. And the drill instructor, standing at the center of it all, exuded the calm authority that had forever shifted the dynamics of the yard. The first lesson in shock and respect had been delivered, and its impact would echo through every challenge that awaited them. The yard remained silent for several moments, each recruit caught between relief and awe. Even the arrogant recruit, now standing with shoulders tight and head lowered, felt the lingering weight of the lesson that had just been delivered. He knew, instinctively, that the confrontation had been more than a display of physical skill. It had been a demonstration of discipline, authority, and control. Every fiber of his being registered the message. Arrogance would not survive here, and respect was not optional. The drill instructor's presence did not waver as she turned her attention to the entire formation. She took a measured step forward, boots striking the gravel with quiet authority, and raised her voice, steady but unmistakable. "Listen carefully," she said, her words carrying across the yard with a calm, commanding resonance. What you just witnessed was not a display of anger or punishment. It was a demonstration of skill, of discipline, and of what it means to respect authority. Arrogance, carelessness, and disregard for command will be met with consequences. That is not negotiable. The recruits absorbed every word, the weight of her tone embedding itself into their consciousness. Some nodded subtly, others remained still, their eyes locked on her as if expecting the slightest infraction to be immediately corrected. Even the arrogant recruit's jaw clenched, the lesson echoing in his mind. Respect was now mandatory, humility essential, and vigilance required. Every second in her presence demanded complete attention, and every lapse carried consequences far beyond what he had imagined. She continued, pacing slowly in front of the formation, eyes sweeping over every recruit with precision. Discipline is not just physical. Strength alone is not enough. Control of your mind, your reactions, and your impulses is what ensures survival. Skill without respect is useless. Confidence without humility is dangerous. You are being trained not just to follow orders, but to internalize a standard that will carry you through every challenge, every mission, every moment you face in this environment and beyond. Her words resonated deeply. The yard, once filled with nervous energy and tentative bravado, now felt taut with focus and understanding. Each recruit felt as if the lesson was directed at them individually, highlighting personal weaknesses and strengths in a way that made introspection unavoidable. They could no longer rely on assumptions, size, or past accomplishments. They had to earn every ounce of respect and prove themselves in every action. The arrogant recruit, now fully aware of the shift in dynamic, adjusted his stance carefully, almost subconsciously. He realized that the lesson was not merely about him, but about everyone present. He had been the catalyst, but the instructor's demonstration had been deliberately designed to teach a collective truth. Arrogance could be dismantled in seconds, and mastery required more than physical ability. It required mental discipline, awareness, and immediate compliance. The instructor's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer, unwavering, as if ensuring the lesson had been fully internalized. She then turned her focus back to the formation. Understand this. Every movement, every choice, every reaction will be observed. You will be tested constantly, not only for your physical performance, but for your judgment, respect, and discipline. Survival depends on your ability to absorb lessons like this, to recognize mistakes immediately, and to adjust without hesitation. Around the yard, recruits exchanged brief, subtle glances, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Fear had transformed into focus. Awe had merged with determination. The smaller recruit, still feeling the adrenaline from the earlier confrontation, clenched her fists slightly, mentally preparing herself for the challenges ahead. The arrogant recruit had been humbled, but his awareness of the lesson made him more attentive, more cautious, and unexpectedly, more willing to learn. The instructor continued, pacing methodically. "Mistakes will happen," she said, voice calm but authoritative. "You will stumble. You will face situations that test every limit you have. But those who survive and thrive are those who internalize every lesson, who respect every authority, and who do not allow arrogance to cloud judgment. Confidence must be paired with humility, skill with awareness, and strength with control. Only then can you succeed." The yard remained silent, but the atmosphere was alive with attention. Every recruit understood that her words were not abstract advice. They were directives with immediate, tangible consequences. Every glance, every stance, every breath carried significance. They had been witnesses to the consequences of overconfidence, and now the verbal lesson reinforced the principle. Obedience, awareness, and respect were inseparable from survival. Some recruits reflected on moments from the past hour, the initial tension when the instructor arrived, the whispered rumors, the nervous adjustments, and the reckless grab by the arrogant recruit. Each detail had contributed to a growing understanding, an unspoken recognition that the instructor's mastery was both physical and psychological. Every trainee now recognized that she was more than a teacher. She was a benchmark, a standard, and a force to be measured against continuously. The instructor's pacing slowed as she approached the center of the yard. Her gaze swept methodically across the formation, landing briefly on each recruit. "Do not mistake skill for cruelty or discipline for anger," she said. "You are being prepared for circumstances that will challenge everything you believe about yourself and those around you. What you have seen today is a demonstration of principles, not punishment. The lesson is simple. Respect what is earned, fear what is mastered, and never underestimate the consequences of arrogance. Her words seemed to settle into the minds of the recruits, sinking beneath surface thoughts and embedding themselves into subconscious awareness. For some, it was an immediate awakening. For others, a slow, simmering realization that would influence every action, every decision, and every interaction in the yard. The lesson was comprehensive, both preventative and corrective, emphasizing mental resilience, attentiveness, and respect. The arrogant recruit, standing at the front, now looked around at his peers. He saw the mixture of awe, focus, and determination reflected in their faces. What had once been whispered bravado and idle confidence was replaced by a shared understanding. Every recruit was under the same scrutiny, bound by the same standards, and faced the same reality. The instructor had not singled him out in cruelty. She had used him as a tangible lesson for the entire group, and her authority had been irrefutably reinforced. Even the smaller recruit, whose initial anxiety had made her fidget and shake, felt a subtle shift in her posture. Her muscles relaxed slightly, her focus sharpened, and an inner resolve began to solidify. She understood that the instructor's presence was not a threat, but a standard to strive toward. Every movement, thought, and reaction now had purpose, guided by the awareness that mastery was built from discipline, humility, and controlled skill. The drill instructor finally stopped moving, standing squarely at the center of the yard. She raised her voice once more, projecting clearly over the formation. Remember this lesson. It is not about punishment, humiliation, or fear. It is about awareness, preparation, and respect. Those who internalize these principles will endure. Those who do not will falter. Survival depends not on arrogance, not on size, not on luck, but on attention, discipline, and understanding the weight of every action. The recruits absorbed the final words, their breaths measured, their stances firm. The lesson had been comprehensive, physical, psychological, and emotional. Shock had given way to respect, and respect had begun to settle into understanding. Every recruit now knew the expectations. Obedience, humility, and mastery were non-negotiable, and any misstep would have consequences. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the yard, the energy shifted subtly. Fear had been transformed into focused determination, awe into motivation, and uncertainty into cautious confidence. The first lesson of shock, respect, and authority had been delivered not only physically but verbally, leaving a profound imprint on every mind present. The arrogant recruit now stood with measured attention, no longer seeking to impress, but to absorb. The smaller recruit felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before, her fear channeled into mental clarity. And the entire formation, once tense with nerves and scattered energy, now moved as a cohesive unit, aligned under the unspoken principles the instructor had demonstrated. The lesson had been delivered, but its effects were only beginning to unfold. Every movement, every glance, every decision from this point forward would be influenced by the memory of the confrontation and the verbal reinforcement that followed. The yard had been transformed, and the recruits had been shaped mentally, emotionally, and physically by the precise, authoritative presence of their drill instructor. For everyone present, one truth remained undeniable. This was more than training. It was a crucible designed to forge resilience, discipline, and respect. And in that moment, each recruit understood that their journey had only begun, but the foundation had been irrevocably established. The lesson had been delivered, absorbed, and imprinted an unforgettable turning point in every recruit's life. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, sharp shadows across the training yard. The heat of the day had softened, but the lessons of the morning still lingered like an unshakable presence. The incident with the arrogant recruit, once a moment of shocking defiance, had become a defining memory for every trainee in the yard. Though hours had passed since the confrontation, the weight of the lesson remained palpable, settling into the minds and bodies of every individual present. For the recruits, the event had shifted something fundamental. What had started as curiosity, apprehension, and scattered bravado had evolved into a shared understanding. Survival here required more than raw strength. It demanded focus, discipline, and respect for those who had earned authority. The yard was no longer just a physical space. It had become a crucible where mental fortitude, awareness, and adaptability were forged. Every corner, every piece of gravel, and every shadow seemed to hold the memory of that lesson, reminding the recruits that the standards were absolute and the consequences immediate. The arrogant recruit, who had been the catalyst of the incident, walked with a new awareness. His head remained slightly bowed, not in submission, but in contemplation. His chest, once puffed with confidence, now carried the weight of understanding. Each step was deliberate, measured, as he recalibrated his approach to training. The embarrassment and shock had faded into something more valuable, an internalized respect for authority, an appreciation for the instructor's mastery, and a recognition that true strength encompassed far more than size or bravado. For other recruits, the effects were subtler but no less profound. The smaller recruit, who had initially trembled under the intensity of the drill instructor's gaze, now moved with steady purpose. Her mind was sharper, her awareness heightened, and her confidence grounded in the recognition that skill and discipline could overcome fear and size. Every movement she made carried the imprint of the morning's lesson, a quiet determination to apply what she had observed to her own development. The drill instructor, meanwhile, remained the steady anchor of authority. Her presence was magnetic, commanding, and yet unyielding in its calmness. She understood that the impact of the demonstration would ripple far beyond the morning drills. Every correction, every command, and every observation that followed would be interpreted through the lens of that single, unforgettable moment. She had not only taught a physical lesson, but had shaped the psychological landscape of the yard, instilling a shared understanding that would guide behavior for the weeks to come. Whispers circulated quietly among the recruits, their content laced with awe and reflection. "Did you see how fast she moved?" One whispered, eyes wide. "He didn't even have a chance," another replied, voice tight with disbelief. "It's not just her strength, it's how she controls everything, every movement." That was insane. These murmurs, though soft, revealed a transformation in mindset. Where once there had been casual assumptions about hierarchy, ability, and respect, now there was attentiveness, vigilance, and a recognition of earned authority. Even the instructors observing from the periphery noted the subtle but significant changes. The recruit's body language had shifted. Shoulders straighter, eyes sharper, hands steadier. They were more alert, more cautious, and more focused than before. The confrontation had served as a tangible benchmark, a lesson that could not be ignored or dismissed. In its aftermath, every drill, every exercise, and every command would be interpreted with a heightened sense of awareness, a deeper respect for discipline, and an understanding of the weight of authority. The psychological impact extended further than mere compliance. It instilled a sense of accountability that transcended the immediate incident. Recruits began to reflect on their own actions, behaviors, and attitudes. They evaluated the small choices that previously seemed inconsequential: posture, readiness, attentiveness, and respect for peers and superiors alike. Every decision became a test of awareness, every movement a measure of discipline. The morning's confrontation had created an enduring ripple effect, shaping thought processes and attitudes long after the physical event had ended. For the arrogant recruit, the lesson became a catalyst for personal growth. He began to approach training with a measured humility, carefully observing the instructor, analyzing her movements, and internalizing the principles she demonstrated. Arrogance was replaced with determination, recklessness with calculated focus. He started noticing details he had overlooked before: the subtle shifts in stance, the precision of timing, the controlled application of force. These observations allowed him to adapt quickly, learning not just from instruction, but from example. Other recruits, inspired by the display, followed suit. They began to hold themselves to higher standards, correcting mistakes immediately, seeking guidance when unsure, and internalizing the principles of respect and discipline that the drill instructor had imparted. The energy in the yard shifted from one of individual competition to collective focus, a shared commitment to improvement and survival. The morning confrontation had transcended its immediate context to become a formative moment, shaping the culture of the group itself. Even routine drills were now imbued with intensity. Each command from the instructor was executed with heightened precision, each maneuver performed with careful attention. The previous casual energy had been replaced by a keen awareness of cause and effect. Recruits understood that small errors could escalate into critical failures, and that every action was observed, evaluated, and remembered. The morning's lesson had created a foundation of vigilance and respect that would underpin every subsequent challenge. The drill instructor observed these changes with careful attention. She understood the subtle dynamics at play, the integration of fear, respect, and focus into a cohesive mindset that would enhance both individual performance and group cohesion. Her approach was not about punishment or intimidation. It was about shaping mental resilience, reinforcing discipline, and establishing standards that could not be compromised. Every glance, every command, every corrective action reinforced the principles demonstrated during the confrontation. By the end of the day, the yard had transformed. Recruits moved with purpose, their focus sharpened by experience and observation. The arrogant recruit, once a source of distraction, had become a model of humility in the making, demonstrating that lessons learned through direct confrontation could catalyze growth and self-awareness. The smaller recruit, along with others, had internalized the importance of mental fortitude, discipline, and controlled skill, preparing themselves for the challenges that lay ahead. Instructors and peers alike began to acknowledge the shift. Mutual respect had deepened, and the hierarchy of authority had become clear. The drill instructor's mastery, both physical and psychological, had left an indelible mark, establishing standards that would influence behavior, training outcomes, and interpersonal dynamics across the yard. The legacy of the moment extended beyond the individual confrontation to the collective culture of the unit. As dusk approached and the yard's activity slowed, the recruits gathered briefly for reflection. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful, and focused on lessons rather than complaints. The incident with the arrogant recruit was recounted in careful terms, emphasizing not humiliation, but the principles of skill, discipline, and respect. The emotional impact of the morning had matured into an understanding of authority, self-awareness, and responsibility that would guide behavior long after the day's drills had ended. Even in quiet moments, the legacy of the confrontation persisted. Recruits reflected privately on their own readiness, their own tendencies toward arrogance or impatience, and the ways in which they could improve. A drill instructor had not only demonstrated skill, but had catalyzed a mental shift, a recognition that training was as much about internal growth as it was about external performance. Every recruit carried the imprint of that lesson, a mental model of authority, precision, and consequence that would inform every decision moving forward. By the time the sun fully dipped below the horizon, the yard was transformed. The lesson of shock, respect, and authority had solidified into the collective consciousness of the recruits. What had begun as an immediate reaction to a single confrontation had evolved into a long-lasting influence on their behavior, mindset, and cohesion. The impact of the drill instructor's mastery, discipline, and authority had created a legacy that would endure far beyond the confines of the yard. The morning confrontation had begun as a test, escalated into a demonstration, and ultimately transformed into a lesson whose effects would resonate long after the day's activities ended. The arrogant recruit, humbled and attentive, now exemplified the principles of respect and awareness. The other recruits, inspired and alert, moved with focused determination. And the drill instructor, ever composed and commanding, had cemented her authority, leaving an enduring legacy of skill, discipline, and psychological mastery that would define the culture of the yard for months to come. The weeks that followed were transformative. The once tense training yard had evolved into a space of quiet precision and disciplined energy. Every recruit moved with purpose, every glance was intentional, and every command executed with care. The memory of the confrontation with the arrogant recruit and the drill instructor's flawless demonstration of SEAL-level skill had become the foundation upon which their behavior and mindset were built. That single unforgettable morning had shifted the entire dynamic, shaping the recruit's journey in profound ways. The arrogant recruit, once a symbol of reckless confidence, had undergone a remarkable transformation. His posture, which had previously been casual and cocky, now carried the weight of awareness and responsibility. He no longer sought attention or attempted to provoke his peers. Instead, he observed quietly, learning not only from the instructor, but from every interaction around him. His humility had become a source of strength, and his confidence, once misguided, was now paired with focus and discipline. Other recruits followed suit. A smaller recruit, who had initially trembled under the instructor's gaze, had grown in both physical and mental resilience. She approached every drill with renewed determination, her movements sharp and precise, her mind attuned to every nuance of her surroundings. She had internalized the lesson that skill was meaningless without respect and discipline, and she applied it rigorously, becoming a quiet example of how the yard's culture had shifted. The drill instructor, ever observant, continued to guide the recruits with unwavering authority. She recognized the subtle shifts in behavior, the heightened attentiveness, the immediate correction of mistakes, and the growing cohesion among the group. Her lesson, delivered in one dramatic confrontation, had been internalized and amplified by the recruits themselves. It no longer needed repetition. Its impact had taken root, shaping the daily rhythm of training and the interactions between individuals. Beyond the yard, the psychological effects were equally profound. Recruits reported feeling more focused, less reactive, and more attuned to the consequences of their actions. Confidence was tempered by humility, and impulsive behavior gave way to calculated decision-making. The confrontation had been a wake-up call, but its true value lay in the ongoing integration of discipline, respect, and situational awareness into every aspect of their training. The group dynamic had shifted as well. Where once there had been scattered bravado, cliques, and subtle competition, a shared respect now underpinned every interaction. Recruits supported one another in subtle ways, correcting mistakes quietly, observing peers' movements with attentiveness, and learning collectively from every exercise. The confrontation had not only taught an individual lesson, but it catalyzed a culture of mutual respect, where skill and discipline were valued above ego and impulsiveness. The instructor's influence extended beyond immediate drills. Recruits began to adopt her approach in small, practical ways, adjusting stances to maintain balance, timing movements precisely, and observing every detail in their environment. Even off-duty interactions reflected a heightened awareness, with trainees consciously moderating behavior, maintaining focus, and striving to internalize the principles demonstrated in that unforgettable morning. The lesson had become a compass, guiding behavior in ways both visible and subtle. For the arrogant recruit, the transformation was most evident. He began to emerge as a leader among the trainees, not through dominance, but through quiet example. He offered advice, observed closely, and corrected mistakes when necessary, all while maintaining the humility and respect instilled by the instructor's lesson. His growth became a case study for his peers, demonstrating how a moment of intense humility could catalyze lasting change and personal development. The smaller recruit, inspired by both the confrontation and her own progress, became a source of encouragement and focus for others. She had learned that resilience was not measured in physical size or strength alone, but in the ability to remain calm under pressure, execute with precision, and maintain respect for authority. Her growth, like that of the arrogant recruit, reinforced the idea that discipline and awareness were the true markers of strength in this demanding environment. The instructor, witnessing these changes, knew that her lesson had achieved its intended effect. She understood the training was not merely about physical drills, but about shaping mindset, character, and resilience. The confrontation had been the catalyst, the demonstration the spark, but the long-term transformation of the recruits was the true measure of success. Each trainee, in their own way, had internalized the principles of discipline, respect, and awareness, ensuring that the yard's culture would remain strong, focused, and cohesive. Months passed, and the recruits continued to grow. Challenges became more complex, exercises more demanding, and the physical and mental intensity increased. Yet the foundation laid during that one morning confrontation remained. Recruits approached obstacles with deliberate attention, measured their actions, and maintained a quiet respect for authority, skill, and discipline. The lessons of humility and controlled confidence persisted, influencing every decision, every maneuver, and every interaction. Even in moments of fatigue, frustration, or uncertainty, the memory of the drill instructor's demonstration provided a reference point. It reminded them that mastery required patience, focus, and respect, and that arrogance could be dismantled in an instant by someone who had honed both skill and awareness. The yard, once a place of nervous energy and scattered attention, had become a crucible for resilience, cohesion, and personal growth. The legacy of that moment extended beyond the individual recruits. As new trainees arrived, the story of the confrontation circulated quietly among peers and instructors alike. It became a teaching tool, a benchmark of authority, and a standard of skill that newcomers were expected to understand and respect. The impact of that single dramatic demonstration rippled through the culture of the base, reinforcing the principles of discipline, respect, and focus for years to come. For the recruits who had witnessed it firsthand, the experience became a defining memory. It shaped not only their behavior in the yard, but their understanding of authority, leadership, and personal responsibility. The arrogant recruit, once a cautionary example, became a testament to the transformative power of humility and focused effort. The smaller recruit, who had initially faced fear and uncertainty, became a symbol of resilience, precision, and mental fortitude. In the quiet moments of reflection, many recruits realized that the lesson had extended far beyond the physical confrontation. They had learned the value of mental discipline, the importance of controlled skill, and the necessity of respecting those who had earned authority. They understood that true strength encompassed both body and mind, and that success in this environment required constant vigilance, awareness, and humility. The drill instructor continued to guide, observe, and correct, but the culture she had instilled persisted even when she was not directly present. Recruits held one another accountable, adjusted their actions with conscious attention, and maintained the discipline and focus that had been demonstrated in that unforgettable moment. The lesson had become self-perpetuating, embedded in the very fabric of the yard's operations and the psyche of every trainee. As the training cycle progressed, the recruits matured. Physical endurance increased, tactical skills sharpened, and mental resilience strengthened. Yet the defining moments, the confrontation, the demonstration, and the verbal reinforcement remained touchstones, guiding their actions and decisions. The arrogant recruit, now tempered and focused, and the smaller recruit, now confident and precise, embodied the transformation that had been catalyzed by the drill instructor's mastery. By the end of the training period, every recruit had internalized the lessons of that day. They had learned that authority was earned, skill was cultivated, and arrogance was fleeting. Respect, discipline, and mental awareness were the true measures of capability, and they would carry those principles into every future challenge. The legacy of that morning, the shock, the respect, the demonstration had shaped the trajectory of their development, creating a standard of excellence that would influence their careers, their decisions, and their lives long after leaving the training yard. The lesson was clear, unforgettable, and enduring. Strength without discipline was meaningless. Confidence without humility was dangerous. And true mastery encompassed both skill and awareness. For every recruit, the confrontation and its aftermath became a permanent reminder of what it meant to face authority, respect skill, and grow under the guidance of a master. And in that quiet, transformative understanding, the yard remained forever changed, shaped by the legacy of one unforgettable morning, one flawless demonstration, and the enduring influence of a drill instructor who had turned arrogance into humility, fear into respect, and potential into achievement.